Donald Trump recently proposed a 50-year mortgage amortization on a post on Truth Social, and it's getting some mixed reactions from people online. And I actually found a very interesting interview by somebody who I think is very intelligent, and so let's share that right now. And so you're watching More Money, let's get it. All right, guys, welcome back. And so this is what I'm talking about. Donald Trump made a post on Truth Social. I'm not actually on Truth Social, but I just found this that, he is sort of comparing himself to President Roosevelt, where he's saying, I guess he's calling himself, in the most Donald Trump way possible, he's calling himself a great American president. This guy. And I guess he's insinuating that he's as good as Roosevelt by starting a 50-year mortgage. Now, I just think it's more funny just because, I think it's funny just because, I got, some of you guys may know, part-time, I was a stand-up comedian back when I was in Toronto. And so I love when, just wild and wacky things happen. In fact, I live for them. And me laughing, that is not a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the presidency. Is just more just the outlandish way that he would propose that, instead of making a post saying, hey, this might be something that could help American taxpayers. He just puts a picture of himself and just calls himself a great American president, which is so wild to me. But anyways, so look, the way I think about mortgage amortizations is I don't know how many homes I've owned. I've owned maybe 3 homes. I think 3 or 4. I can't remember. And any time that I've purchased a home, my gross debt service ratios would be more than sufficient for a 10-year mortgage amortization. And then I'd push the mortgage amortizations out. I'd push it to 30 years. Reason why I did that is because the payments would be lower and it would give me some wiggle room if in the event I found myself out of work. Now, that was more relevant to when I was younger and I didn't have savings. Now I don't really care. And so, I don't think pushing the mortgage amortization out matters as much for me. But one of the things that I would consider as I would say a person with a higher than normal financial acumen is that a longer amortization period works for people who want to keep the payments low and then kind of do an arbitrage where instead of putting the money into the capital or building equity in the home, they build equity outside of the home that generates a higher rate of return. Not a lot of very wealthy people that I know do that, actually. They like to bring their mortgages down to zero. But there are some people, I would say much wealthier than me, obviously much wealthier than me. There's a lot of people much wealthier than me, but there's a lot of people that, or I guess there's some people that I know who try to get their mortgages to as close to interest only as possible. And then they invest everything into other areas, specifically their businesses that generate returns on invested capital of north of 40%. So it makes sense in those scenarios, but in those scenarios, they can, with a snap of their finger, pay off their mortgages tomorrow if they wanted to. And so it's just a way of not tying up their capital in their home. So I think that's really where a 30 versus 50-year amortization makes sense, because you're just getting closer to interest only, and you have the ability. So I think the 50-year amortization is more of a Band-Aid approach for an expensive housing market environment. And it's really only advantageous for people who want to financially engineer a different type of solution for themselves, which is not who you're intending to help anyways. My perspective is, if you need a 50-year mortgage amortization because your gross debt and your total debt service ratios are too high on a 30-year mortgage amortization, you're probably buying too much home. And we're in an environment where if the city, this is easier said than done, so don't shoot me for this, but if the city or place that you're living is too expensive for you to afford a home, I would consider going to a different state. And I know that that's easier said than done. It's not as easy to get a job as it was a couple of years ago. And so it might not be the optimal solution for everybody, but it's just something to think about. If I was in a situation where I did not qualify, under a 30-year amortization, but I qualified under a 50-year amortization, I'd probably just continue renting. Now, I found an interview by Meredith Whitney, and if you remember, she was actually the one who called the 2008 housing market crash. So let's take a look at an interview that she did.
High home prices and interest rates have contributed to a relatively stuck market that's on pace for the slowest pace of existing home sales growth in a quarter century. So what's it going to take to unstick it and bring in new buyers? Let's talk to Meredith Whitney about that. Meredith Whitney, Advisory Group CEO.
Now, I just want to pause right there. Take a look at this chart, by the way. It is actually wild to me that the median age of US homebuyers is kind of just following, I guess, my age, right? Because like when I first bought a house, I was just under 30, and now, you know, we're into 25, and like look at this steep increase. So it's like, you know, it's just wild to me that the first time home buyer is someone who's middle aged and not someone in their late 20s, early 30s, which, by the way, is higher than what you would want anyways. I'd almost think like people starting families in their late 20s to early 30s should be the first time homebuyers. But that's showing you the degradation in the economy and how you're getting this bifurcation. I don't know how to say that, but basically wealth is really being concentrated at the top. And, you know, anybody younger than 40, I'd say, you know, like 30 and under, you can see that they're really struggling.
And bring in new buyers. Let's talk to Meredith Whitney about that. Meredith Whitney, Advisory Group CEO.
Now, I do want to pause here. If you guys may not know this, but this is actually something funny. So Meredith Whitney, I don't know if you guys know who her husband is. Let me show you this quickly. So if anybody's a fan of pro wrestling, Meredith Whitney is actually married to JBL. And, you know, this is from the early 2000s, but if you remember JBL, that guy had the clothesline from hell. And there he is just knocking Eddie Guerrero's head off. Take that, Rey Mysterio. Rey Mysterio actually has a son now who's famous in wrestling. I don't know who this masked guy is, but anyways, clothesline from hell, JBL, there goes The Undertaker. So just so you guys know, I always found that very funny that Meredith Whitney was married to pro wrestler JBL. Okay, so let's go back to the interview.
Oh, Meredith, it's good to see you. I mean, these numbers are pretty astonishing in terms of the ages, right? If you take home buyers overall, not just first time, the age is 59.
Yeah, up 50% from 2010, yeah.
Yeah, it is astonishing. So what can be done? Or do we just have to wait around for rates to come down?
I think, well, I mean, one of the biggest problems is that over 60% of homes are owned by people over 60 and they're not moving. So they, by and large, own their homes full out. And you know, for them to downsize, they're not getting much on a value basis for them to downsize. So they prefer to age in place. That keeps the market pretty gummed up. So there's even less inventory than there would be otherwise. There's obviously a shortage of housing inventory, but existing homes, there's a gummed up market, as you said, because people are aging in place. They don't want to sell. So one thing that I think is interesting, you know, a couple of things have been floated over the last week, which is a 50-year mortgage, which doesn't make much sense to me, or a portable mortgage, which I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Portable mortgages were something, now she doesn't know how that works, but maybe it's just not as prevalent in the US. But back in the 80s and 90s, portable mortgages are mortgages that stay with the property. And so when you would sell the home, the mortgage you could sell with the home. So why would that be advantageous? Well, if the rates, if you locked in a lower rate and the rates went higher, you could actually sweeten the pot for the new buyers by porting the mortgage over to them, and then they can reap the benefits of a lower mortgage. And so that's what a portable mortgage was. And a lot of people in the province of Ontario did use that or in those times. I don't know if it exists anymore, but it was something that was used back in the day.
That is encouraging is that something that was passed in the Senate Banking Committee over the summer in July, which is the Road Reinvention of the American Dream Act for housing. And so what it focuses is insofar of what the federal government can do, which is limited, which is, let's say, 20 to 30% of the pain. Most of it's a local problem, a regional problem.
So that's a very valid point. Most of the issue with housing inaffordability or unaffordability is at the local level. And so, I was noticing that a lot of the outrage or a lot of the commentary was directed at the federal level, but there's not that much that the president can do. There's certain things that the president can do, but a lot of what can be done to increase affordability of homes has to be done at the local level. And so she made a very good point there, at least in my opinion.
Is getting rid of a lot of the red tape and encouraging funding programs and grant programs for the states that are really going to accelerate housing programs and build more housing. And there's a big emphasis on manufactured housing, which is over a quarter cheaper than the site-built, stick-built homes. And I think that's going to be a big way forward for housing, which is just...
Now, I want to pause there because one of the things that we've actually been focusing on this channel for many years is manufactured home builders. And in the tracker that I show you guys that you could get access to for that $5 a month, and the link is in the tracker below. That's my terrible plug for today. You can actually see that one of the companies that we've been following for many years, and many of the Patreons are invested in this name, is a company by the name of Cavco. And just you can see the deliveries just picking up year over year. I think there was an acceleration in 21 and 22, and now you're kind of normalizing back to the high 90s, low hundreds. And I think you'll just continue this trajectory forward. And so, manufactured homes are cheaper. They are becoming more and more popular, and there are stocks that you can use to invest in this wave of growth. Manufactured homes look absolutely fantastic. I think it's a great way to address the shortage. I don't know if you get basements in them. That's a different type of argument. I mean, if I'm going to save 30%, I can go without a basement, right? But I think it's a good long-term type of investment. Now, I will say the market did catch on. We were buying Cavco when it was very cheap because the market didn't see it. But since then, I think it's trading at like 125% of its intrinsic value right now, which, I mean, for a 30-year investor, that might still not be a bad entry point. And, my model, the last time I updated that particular model was in May of 25. And so, you guys are updating your own models. You might come up with a different valuation. So let me know in the comments what you think a company like Cavco is worth, or are there other manufactured home names that you guys are investing in that present some form of opportunity. But part of our housing market thesis, and, the folks here have been invested in home builders for a long time, has been in manufactured homes.
Build much more affordable housing and then get government programs to incent more opportunity zones and smaller lot sizes. There's a lot that can be done. And, kudos to the bipartisan passing of the bill in the House Banking Committee. That moves then to the larger Senate and then the House. Obviously, the House Banking Committee is going to have to take a close look at it, but it looks pretty good. And I think that's probably a better step forward than what seems to be a quick fix, but not a very realistic quick fix in terms of a 50-year mortgage or a portable mortgage.
Now, she brings up a really good point there. I'm just getting used to this, by the way. This is a purely American thing, and you're talking to a Canadian who just, over the last couple of years moved to the U.S. I've lived kind of all over the place. I was in Texas, and now I'm in Michigan. Opportunity zones are, if you guys haven't heard of them, my interpretation of opportunity zones are in a particular local area. If you invest in a particular objective, you will get favorable tax treatment. And so if you create an opportunity zone for first-time home buyers, call it a 3-bedroom home under, like if you're building these homes and the cost is under 300 grand, and you're giving the real estate developer a large opportunity zone credit, which includes tax credits, then I think you could spur cheaper development. So I don't know if those exists or not. I know that they exist. I'm in the software space. I know that they exist in the software space in particular cities. I know, like, for example, San Antonio, Texas, they want more software companies in San Antonio. A lot of them go to Austin, which, to be honest, Austin is only like an hour and a half down the road. One straight highway, by the way, down the road. And so a lot of companies set up shop there. And so San Antonio want some of that to be set up in San Antonio. And so they offered an opportunity zone. So my thoughts are many cities can do the same with entry market real estate to get that median age down, at least in their local jurisdictions.
Why is a 50-year mortgage, in your view, not a good idea?
It doesn't really lower the cost. I mean, to me, you've got to do two things.
Doesn't it increase the cost? Potentially?
It doesn't necessarily lower the cost competitively for a 30-year mortgage necessarily. You're paying down a lot of interest. You're not paying down a lot of principal with that structure, and you're not building a lot of equity, which is what the American dream is all about. So if you look at seniors, I always go back to seniors, which again own 60+% of homes. 79% of them, 76% of them own homes without a mortgage. So they bought their home likely with a mortgage. They paid down because they paid.
So think about that for a second. 60% of all the homes in the market in the US are owned by people 65 or older. I guess that's the seniors. So 65 or older. So senior citizens own 60% of the homes. That is wild to me.
Paid more down in principal than in interest. A 50-year mortgage works the opposite way. So it's not clear that it lowers costs. But again, you've got to have two things. They're not mutually exclusive. You have to have home prices come down, and you have to have rates come down to make housing more affordable. You just can't have lower rates and have home prices stay so stubbornly high. So home prices have gone up over 45% since 2020. And so there's softness in the Texas market, in the Florida market, but overall home prices are still stubbornly high. And that's keeping a lot of, as you led the segment on, first time buyers out of the market. I think a lot of what I call avocado toasters, which are a combination of younger millennials and Gen Z, think that perhaps the American dream is just out of the realm of possibility and that they'll be renting.
I don't understand why that is so hard to understand. You just said that the price of homes are up almost 50% from 2020, and then you're saying avocado toasters think that the American dream is not reachable anymore. No. It isn't reachable for a lot of people anymore, because the price of housing has gone up by 50%. And in my opinion, and I'm not a sociology person by any means, but I am a male, right? And I'm a father, and I'm a homeowner. I would not think of starting a family or getting married if I can't buy a home. It's just how I think. And so the idea that family formations have slowed down makes a lot of sense to me, because I'm sure that there's people who think the way that I do. Now, can you start a family renting and maintain a family renting? Yes. I grew up in rentals my whole life. My family didn't own homes. We could barely rent. So like, it can be done. But there's such an entrenchment in the heart of Americans, where you buy a single family home and then you start your family, and if you can't buy a single family home, you may not necessarily want to start a family, and so I understand that, because I think the same way. I don't know if, and I can't I can't speak for what I would do in that situation, but if I was in a situation where I could only rent and things were a lot tighter, I would probably delay having children. And, just because I'm a guy, I could probably have children later on in life. But, I don't think that that's a reality for most people. And so it makes sense that people are, in their 40s and they still don't have kids because they never felt financially capable of doing this. And I see memes all the time, and the memes will be like, can I just have precedented times? And it's a very millennial type of meme because, as teenagers, we saw the dot-com crash. Once we got out of university, we saw the housing crash. And now it appears that we're in a different kind of bubble where everything is just expensive. So at the time when we should be buying homes, we can't buy homes unless some of us were high earners early on in our 20s. I happened to luck out and be one of those people where I was able to afford a home in my 20s. But, if you were sensible and, just like an average earner and somewhat sensible, and you were just trying to save that 20% down, while simultaneously the market's running past you. And so you save a little bit, but the market just keeps going faster. And then eventually you're just like, okay, hands up, I'm priced out no matter what I try to do. Can you really blame that person? And so I'm ranting right now, but I don't think that it's a function of millennials thinking that the American dream has been is not a reality for them. I think it is a reality. And as older people, we just have to acknowledge that.
For their lives. And maybe that's not a bad thing because renting has actually been cheaper than owning because of the high prices associated with homeowners insurance. And
I might just be getting a little bit aggressive right now. Calm me down. I've had 2 glasses of diet pop, so I'm just raging right now. But I think she just said not being able to afford a home may actually be a good thing because it's more affordable to rent. I don't know how many people would think that that's a good thing.
Overall cost of maintaining a home.
Now, barring a regulatory solution or a legislative solution, like you mentioned, like in terms of market dynamics, what would need to change? Obviously rates coming down would help, but how much do rates and prices need to come down, and what's going to get them to come down?
Sorry, I hate to use this. More sellers than buyers always gets the market to come down. There are more buyers than sellers right now. And so that means that home prices are going to be higher for longer. And then, of course, rates coming down by at least 100 basis points. That would be, I'm going back to when the last time the housing market was hot.
Now, if rates come down by 100 basis points, what do you think is going to happen? I don't think that that's going to make home prices go down. I think that rates going down by 100 basis points is more likely to make home prices go higher.
Was 2020, very early 2021, and rates were lower and home prices were a lot lower. So even if you had a medium correction in home prices of 10%, that would help a little bit. But again, we have more buyers than sellers, and that this is again because seniors are not doing the things that they used to do. This housing market is unlike any housing market before.
Now, before she goes into her next point, I would say that more buyers than sellers helps our thesis, right? And our thesis, and this has been the same thesis for the last 4 years with home builders, and it's been profitable for us as investors. But I think the more buyers than sellers thesis effectively means that new home builders is the way out for a lot of people to get the cheapest entry level home. And so I think that the fact that people are sitting on homes, new home builders in fast growing areas with young populations make a lot of sense. And I would say, in the Patreon, the again, shameless plug, but in the Patreon, the list of some of the cheapest securities, share price relative to intrinsic value, there's some new home builders there, and it's there for a reason.
Because you have fewer people getting married, you have lower homeowner household formation rate, and then you have fewer people selling and downsizing. So more people are aging in place, and more people are living alone for longer. So 26% of adults live by themselves. That doesn't help the housing inventory very much. It's Harvard Joint Housing Study says that only 1 in 10 seniors can afford to live in assisted living, and for that reason, a lot of people are stuck in their homes. So it's a multi-pronged and complex.
Now, actually, I'm familiar with the Harvard study that she's talking about, and let me pull it up here for you guys. So here is the Harvard University Joint Center for Housing Studies study, and what I found cool was the interactive map here. Take a look at what they're saying. They're saying that not like in the red, 90% of the seniors can't afford to live in assisted living in these areas, and that's basically everywhere, right? Like, you got Detroit Metro, you got the west side of the state there, so that's me. You got basically all of the east, right? Whether you're in Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, New Jersey, like all of these, that's where everyone lives. So basically they're saying where everybody lives, they can't afford assisted living. And, this is the same everywhere. Like, I think this is San Antonio, Austin. Yep, that's San Antonio, Austin. So 85 to 89% in what would be considered a low-cost state. I think this is Houston. Am I wrong? Yep, Houston. So same thing. What else? We got the Miami area in Florida. Yep. And then you got this is Tampa probably. Yep. Tampa, Orlando. So, these allegedly cheap areas are also where 85% of the share of older people cannot, afford to, live in assisted, living facilities. And so, what is the reason why you wouldn't be able to live in these assisted living facilities? Well, there's quite a few reasons. One of them is that costs. Like these things are expensive. They're not subsidized. Most older adults live on fixed income or low incomes. The median income for a single person over 75 is around 25 to 30K per year. That doesn't even cover half the assisted living cost. Most of their wealth is in their home equity and not actually in cash. So they don't have liquid savings to pay for it. And, long-term care in the US is barely subsidized. And so that is the reason why, people can't afford assisted living. And so that's the reason why they're staying at home.
Problem to solve, and a lot of it's going to have to do with zoning restructuring, local reforms, federal reforms, and it's not, again, there's no quick fix.
Speaking of no quick,
now I will show you guys one fix. Now this is not for everyone, but it just goes back into the thesis of these home builders. If you notice, some of these home builders now, and I'm seeing this happen in Canada, I'm also seeing this happen in the US. This is Wayne Homes. This is a U.S. builder. They are offering multi-generational floor plans. Same with Pulte. I'm very familiar with Pulte. They are also offering multi-generational floor plans. Even in homes where they don't explicitly say that it's a multi-generational home plan, there tends to be a room on the main floor for, I would say, your parents or someone to live in. And so this isn't a solution for everybody. I'm only really seeing it in homes that have like 3,000 square feet or more. So this is a solution for people that can pay $600,000 or more for their home. Again, that's going to be in that 40 plus demographic. This isn't going to be for the for the young folks that are trying to get into their first home. But that is a potential solution for older people, where they can combine their wealth with their children and then live together in the same home. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. I'm also, sort of thinking about that, as my wife's parents are getting older and my parents are getting older, I sort of think about that for both of our families. Like, it's almost like there's, there may not necessarily be any concrete plans or anything, but it's like if something happens and you never know what happens, you want to be able to have the space so you can take them in just in case. And I definitely think like that. And maybe it's just because I'm a father now, and I just kind of think about both the grandparents and the children at the same time. It's just, I think it's just something that happens to you when you become a dad.
Fix the last point that you touched on about the affordability of assisted care for people who need it, right? Does there also need to be sort of a policy prescription to deal with that because of the aging of Americans and people not being able to afford that kind of care? So then does that have the dual effect of helping elderly Americans and also loosening up the housing market?
Yeah, I think that there's some really creative, really creative solutions. So there's been a chronic undersupply of home health care aides, and that's not improving with a slowdown in immigration because so many of the healthcare aides are foreign born and guest workers or on their path to citizenship, and that has been. And as more people, as the silver tsunami, the majority of the boomers have passed the threshold of becoming seniors, that only amplifies the numbers. So I have written extensively about a Golden Girls type housing arrangement where you have shared housing in single family housing and you'd have shared home healthcare workers. You got to think of new strategies, but not only is aging very lonely and loneliness is a major contributor to aging faster, that a shared housing agreement helps that, also shares expenses, and also helps with the healthcare shortage. But creativity is critical here, and there's got to be a lot of optionality, and everything that needs to be on the table.
I love the Golden Girls solution, Meredith. That's a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate her her input there. The collective living idea, if you're single and you're older, not a bad idea. Especially, there's a lot of people who a spouse will die and then they're just living in the home by themselves. I think ultimately the solution for younger buyers is with new home builders who are building in areas where there's a lot of growth. And they're doing it probably tract builders or certain spec builders that are specifically focused on the entry level. I think that ultimately brings the costs down. And so, yeah, I think overall the 50-year mortgage proposed by Donald Trump probably is going to help people like us, like finance people, more than it's going to help the regular people. I think a decline in rates is probably just going to push up the prices of homes. I think Meredith Whitney's idea about opportunity zones and finding ways to bring prices of homes down helps. And I think the builders building multi-generational homes. So, it's kind of a way to sort of share the wealth before the ultimate wealth transfer when your parents pass away anyways. And so I think those types of solutions, creativity here is gonna go a long way. And so you guys let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, and I try and answer everyone as quickly as I can. All right, I'll see you guys later.